All right, everybody. Rob Ferretti standing out here in the rain, and it's not as bad as it was yesterday. Yesterday, they were calling for rain all week, right? Like, it's rain, rain. And then Hurricane Debby is coming this weekend. It's devastated Florida with a lot of flooding. It was a Category 1. It wasn't even a hurricane just until right before landfall. It went from a tropical storm to a hurricane. In Florida, they laugh at Category 1 hurricanes. Nobody even bothers evacuating. But they got crushed with flooding. So I'm like, all right, this weekend, I don't want a relapse of Ida where we had water in the warehouse. We had a foot of water in the warehouse. I was like, let's be vigilant this weekend. Yesterday it rained, and I'm like, oh, whatever, it's raining. It's going to rain later this afternoon. You don't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden, I get a call from my brother. He's like, yeah, I got to head back to the warehouse. It looks like it's going to flood. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I went to the security cameras and find this. So you can see the water in the span of about 2 hours went up from just regular rain up to almost getting in the warehouse within a couple of inches, probably 3 or 4 inches of cresting over into the warehouse. But as you can see, today is another day and nothing out here, right? You can see some remnants down here in the pit. Now this is going to be the low point here. This and then over there by the other dumpster, both low points. So they're going to get the water first and then collect it. Anything that, the roads are always crowned, so anything that starts in the roads is going to run down, and that's obviously going to be the first to fill up. That was the first telltale sign we had. It was like, oh, something's not looking good. And now the curbs are supposed to be 6 inches. I would say, I mean, they look a little bit less, right? They look like they may be 4.5 inches would be my guess. But this ground here is higher. So once this starts filling up, you're going to have water then go to the next lowest point, and about, let's just say, of using the road there, about 7 or 8 inches of standing water throughout this entire area, and all the drains, everything has to be filled and clogged. You need about 7 or 8 inches of water to even touch my door. Tinfoil hat. Do I have a tinfoil hat? I have a hard time believing that in just even say at a rate of 2 inches an hour, which is incredible. That's a ton of rain. At the full downpour for 2 inches an hour, at 4 inches, we shouldn't have had anything that resembled what I saw yesterday as far as flooding. Like, there shouldn't have been, and that's called flash flooding, right? Like groundwater flooding or storm surge flooding is different. Flash flooding is just a lot of rain. It can't be absorbed or processed quick enough from the stormwater mitigation, so it just starts piling up and backing up, and that goes away very quickly. 4 inches of rain, even if it was 4 inches of rain, should not have caused anything that looked like what I saw yesterday. And I think the problem is this, and the engineers will never admit to it. We are not in a flood zone. Like, this is not a flood. I mean, maybe it's a 100-year flood zone, but it's not traditionally a flood zone. I wouldn't get a warehouse in a flood zone because that would cost far too much money. Now, another frustrating thing as I'm walking over to show you this creek is our insurance removed flood insurance after the last flood. And they're like, oh, we had no flood coverage on the warehouse to begin with, regardless of whether it was a flood zone or not. Because why would an insurance company want to cover something that has a remote possibility of happening? They wouldn't. That's why they stay in business. But fast forward, the cars have no insurance for flood now. And I'm like, well, you could say, like, if there's got to be a safety plan that we have to follow in the event that there's predictable flooding. But if I have my car somewhere else, if I'm parked at a hotel somewhere on a trip and there happens to be a freak storm and there's flooding there, you can't exclude flood coverage from my policy. Because I can't, that's the whole reason I carry insurance, is because if something unpredictable happens, I want it to be covered. I don't want you to be like, well, we had to write a check last time, so no coverage next time this happens. Like I intentionally parked it in a swimming pool. Bullshit. I think that there's just so much building and construction going on that they can't keep up with the fact that there's not enough stormwater mitigation. So when the rain comes regionally, it's got to go somewhere. So it gets all processed into these systems, And the systems that we have aren't enough to process the stormwater. So here, this creek, which is, obviously you can see the runoff over there. This creek, which they've actually dredged out significantly, is, come on, let's go look that way. It's the first thing to overflow. Now this is significantly higher than the ground level, so this overflows, and then that pushes the water all the way over here. So that is our problem, is that this creek, and it's not predictably overflowing, which is where my tinfoil hat comes in. I think that the engineers, instead of saying, we just don't have a good solution, we can't put 30-inch pipes under everything, it'll take too long, it'll cost too much money, so we'll just divert water on different storms to different areas, and then when it's your turn, you get flooding. But it's not every time it rains you get flooding, because if it always floods in the same place, that's the engineer's job to fix. If they just keep diverting water in different places and everybody just waits their turn to get flooded, then it's just like, well, that's the breaks. It was just a bad storm. Something must have happened. But this creek over here is the cause of our flooding. And it shouldn't be. It's designed to prevent us from having flooding. And that's what's very frustrating. Because it's not like we have too much water trying to get into the creek. That creates like puddles like this. And a little bit, that's why you have these extra runoff things. But that doesn't cover the entire area with water. And what we're experiencing is the entire area being covered with water. And here's what my day looked like yesterday. I got a call from my brother, and it didn't even start raining at my house yet. Apparently the storm cell was just below me, and it was raining down here for 2 hours. And I'm like, oh, he's like, I got to go back to the warehouse. It looks like we're going to be getting some flooding. I just got a call from Mike, who's the guy we share the building with. And he says they've got water in their warehouse, but it turned out that was from they had a pipe burst. A completely different story. But one of the downspouts from the roof collects water and it processes it down, popped a hole in the side. So the stormwater from the roof was coming out and filling their warehouse. Didn't even make it to our warehouse, wasn't a big deal. But that's unrelated. But I was like, oh, well, why are you going to the shop? He came down and he started preparing, and he drives a Jeep, started preparing for potential flooding, because it was 2 hours into the storm and they said we're going to have heavy rain for the remainder of the night. That was luckily preparation that didn't need to be used, because the water started receding again shortly after I ended that previous video. But let me show you what we're doing now, because this is exactly what happened with Ida, is that we had a rainstorm and then we had the hurricane. And remember, we don't get flooding, but we all got flooded. This entire area got a foot of water. Every warehouse around here, and Englewood, everything else. Even Cosmo called me up yesterday. I was talking to him, like, Cosmo, you checking on your warehouse? And he was there, soaked head to toe, standing out in the rain, dealing with it. And he's like, yeah, like watching people crash into each other and go down the street completely flooded with water. But here's what we're doing to try to safeguard this weekend, because I don't want a repeat of the flooding we had 3 years ago. And this is also good safety tips on how you can prevent your stuff if something does happen that you're not ready for, how you can get ahead of it and what you can do. Because now I'm like, all right, like we need some jack stands. Like we need jack stands. We can put everything up in the air on jack stands. All of the cars up on the top here, those are fine. You're never gonna have 7 feet of water in here. If we do have 7 feet of water in here, everybody's dead already anyway, because I don't know what would ever cause that apocalyptic condition. But the other cars that are on the ground, last night my brother rammed these, the Ferrari and the Lambo up. All the low cars we put up on the lifts. And the cars that didn't go on the lifts went on the ramps for the lifts, just to give them that extra couple of inches. And you see, almost like a dealership display would have the cars. Just brings it up, because now there's a full 12 inches of water below the rotor there, which would prevent any sort of flooding. The cars that we have, like the Urises back here, those, and we do have an extra like inch lip here, so that's usually a little less water back here if it ever comes in again. But the Urises back here are both significant ground clearance. The Aston Martin we put up in the air, but everything else we're going to put up on jack stands. Now, what do you do? So you don't have lifts in your garage, right? Like, what do? You have a jack, but the jacks that we had, and this is a useful thing to know, the jacks that we had during the flood last time, they lost their ability to jack. So whatever the water gets in the seals or something like that, so putting the jack up in the air, as soon as that water submerges it, it's going to lose its pressure and the car is going to come down anyway, so you're not really saving anything. But what you can do is you can use what you have. Now, jack stands are preferable because jack stands, you can put an entire car up in the air, just say 12 or 14 inches, and that should be enough to cover you if something happens. Because obviously if you get 2 or 3 feet of water, I can't help you there. But for a standard place that doesn't flood, just getting it up that high. You can use something that's heavy, like if you have cinder blocks. Like think about somebody stealing your car. They'll put it on cinder blocks, they'll put it on wood. Stack something up, jack the car up. Here, I have a bunch of tires. And that's what I told my brother last night. I'm like, jack the cars up, take the tire, put it under, and obviously we're not using the Lambo because the Lambo is up in the air, but jack the car up, put the tire underneath the other tires, and that'll bring it up. So anything that'll support the weight of the car, I don't even care about ruining the tires. It's much easier than dealing with an insurance claim or dealing with the cost to repair these cars if they do get water. Everything else is pretty much clear, but the SUVs and everything that's on the ground right now, this weekend, now that we have time to prepare, all this stuff is getting out of here. Like, I don't care about anything that's on the ground. Everything that's got a value is going to be up in the air, like all these cars. And all the other cars, SUVs included, are going to go to higher ground. Like even my NSX, I parked it at my house. I regretted having for the last storm, I brought my Ferrari and my NSX down to the shop thinking that they would be safe. I'm like, oh, I don't want, there's going to be a hurricane coming through here. I don't want to leave them in my front yard. My house is high. It's never going to flood. It never floods. Like the basement, the only reason I had water ever in my basement was because of a sump pump failure. But outside my house, they'll get wet. It'll rain on them. Maybe a branch will fall on them or something like that. But you're never going to have a condition where there's going to be groundwater and my cars are subject to flooding. So my NSX is already going to be up at my house. Maybe I'll get an outdoor car cover or something like that to try to keep it as clean as I can, but it is what it is at this point in time. If it gets wet, it gets wet, as long as it doesn't get flooded. All these other cars, you could do what I'm going to do, is going to move them all to a public parking garage, 2 or 3 stories up, which obviously you're not going to be the first person to think about this. Get your car out of there, put it on higher ground, right? That's what you do. I lived in Edgewater for a while. There was a storm coming and I was expecting coastal flooding. I brought my cars off site. I brought them over to Franklin Lakes and put them 25 miles away so that they were at higher ground. So that's what you could do to try to avoid it. We'll see what ends up happening this weekend. My fingers are crossed that we're not going to get water in here, but we're preparing as if we are, only because it's a similar circumstance where they're expecting tons of rain from Hurricane Debby, and we're going to be getting rain leading up to that point, so the ground is already going to be saturated, so it's not like there's going to be anywhere for it to go. So wish me luck. If you want to rent cars for the weekend, park them at your house. I'll give you a great deal. I don't need them here. I'm happy to do that. But at the end of the day, it is a problem that we're going to face, and we're going to try to mitigate it, and we're going to try to limit our exposure. So if anything does happen, we are not screwed. Screwed is the word. Rob Ferretti, thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.